$80,000 to do that. So we're generally very comfortable with Reach 2. As we work through this issue, the state statutes and the inland management plan is in sync, and is clear that the sand has to go to the beaches that need it the most. And right now, pursuant to this survey information, that is both Reach 1 and Reach 2. That is not new information. We had previously provided you that information based on DEP's interpretation of the inland management plan and the state statutes. There is a provision to fill up Reach 1 and or Reach 2 that we can commit at some point within a reasonable period to replace that sand that we're not currently programmed to replace. We had a conversation with DEP last week, and they are agreeable that if we divert sand to the west, that if within 3 years that we replace that sand, that we don't put in Reach 1 and or Reach 2, then they're good with that. Now that sand source could be the inlet, it could be a permanent beach restoration project. You could buy sand from an upland source and truck it in. I mean, there's lots of different ways to satisfy that obligation. So we've made progress on that part. And right now, with the handshake that we have with the shares and Mr. Donovan, that we're basically, if we divert 80,000 cubic yards to the west, that leaves us somewhere around, if we can't get to the 210, we can only get to 160. That would be 80,000 going to the east and 80,000 going to the west. If we can get the 210, it would be 105 going to the west and 105,000 going to the east. Okay. My understanding, Mr. Stewart can fill in the details, but I believe the city of Destin has now suspended its negotiations on being able to get the easements for Reach 2, so Reach 2 is no longer in consideration. Is that correct?
They suspended the efforts to get the GAP properties.
So those GAP properties, which was a condition, our ability to actually physically get sand to Reach 2. So with this, what we have now, if Reach 2 is no longer in service, it would be a 50-50 split between east and west. It could be as little as 80,000 each, or as much as 105,000 each way, going east and west. That's still only about 60 to 65% of the sand that Reach 1 needs. So we will owe, for Reach 1, depending on the quantities, additional sand within the next 3 years to satisfy the state statute and the inland management plan. We had a good conversation yesterday with the Corps of Engineers relating to the proceeding with this project. The dredge is now starting work to the east of us. They anticipate that work being about 30 days, and that dredge being available to be over here to start the dredging of the east pass. There's two things that we're working through, and they believe sincerely that if they have good weather and we just divert sand to the east and to the west and not do Reach 2, that they believe that they can do it within their $1.5 million appropriation they have, and will not need additional dollars from Okaloosa County. That's the best case. Worst case is we get weather, and they're going to need some additional funding for us. You previously, in the summer of 2018, approved the contributed funds agreement up to the $2 million. That, unfortunately, is stuck in OMB on the federal level. They're monitoring that progress. As soon as it comes out of OMB, they're then required to notify the congressional committees, and then they'll be able to finalize that agreement for us through the contributed funds agreement. And we'll continue that dialogue with them, but hopefully the contributed funds agreement would be a mechanism in place to augment those federal funds if they're insufficient to do the project. The other path that we have, that if for some reason the contributed funds agreement can't get on snag, then what we would do is enter into a separate contract with Hooks for them to complete the work. And both of those avenues are available and completely acceptable to the Corps of Engineers. The last kind of wrinkle in this is from a permitting standpoint, and as of right now, the permits are not in hand, the federal permits are not in hand for the Corps to do this project. They have until February 23rd to get comments from the federal agencies. They don't believe there will be extensive comments. They think they'll be able to work through those issues and then issue the permit sometime in early March. They're still, that's best track, and they're optimistic that will occur. They think, in all the comments that they have, would expect to see that they'd be able to resolve them and move forward. So you've got the Corps operational folks needing to issue a task order to Mike Cooks to do the dredging late February, early March. The permits need to be in hand late February, early March for everything to sync up. The wild card in all of this, and they were very candid with it, if there is another government shutdown, it could easily impact the ability to get permits to do the project. And that's not within the Corps of Engineers' control in the Mobile District. So we're working all of those issues and trying to figure out, that path. But right now, we think we have a path forward that is agreeable to all the different parties, the state, the Corps, Sherry Donovan, and hopefully the county, that would allow us to get the East Pass dredge and the sand placed, most likely a 50-50 split, east and west, within that early March, middle of March timeframe. So, did I miss anything, Mr. Stewart? Chairman Wine, do you?
Just that the dredge, I believe, is west of us presently, working this way. You said east. Not that it makes a big amount of difference. The only other thing I'd add is, I feel like the Corps' projection is on the optimistic side, and on the realistic side, we'll have to put some money in there if we have any weather at all.
So the weather issue is, we split out outside of everybody's control.
I think you covered it. I think the only issue that the acceptance by DEP of this agreement has been at a lower level. We have not gotten through the hierarchy on that to get final approval, but we're working on it.
Sure.
First of all, I want to say blessed are the peacemakers. Thank you, Mr. Casella, for all the work you've done on this, because we had to get a lot of stars to align to get to this point. And of course, I guess we'll all watch the State of the Union tonight to see whether we're going to have a government shutdown or what the standoff in D.C. is going to be, because that is very real. And these are the kinds of things that it impacts. I mean, this could really push this calendar from March to April to May, so, and we, as Chairman said, the hooks companies to the west of us and moving this way. So thank you for all that you've done, and we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope that we've now reached a place where everybody will be happy with the East Pass and the allocation of sand. One final note brought up originally by Chairman Boyles, I would like at some point to go to work on the fact that I also don't agree with REACH 2 being involved in this ever again. So they need to find another sound source, in my opinion, that we shouldn't be held up worrying about REACH 2 being a part of the inlet management plan. I don't know how we can do that and how we go forward, but at some point that shouldn't be.
Yeah, we do have, I believe that Patty has been arranging briefings with the MRD, Mike Grabowski's firm, to brief you on the results of that study, at least a tentative, to get your input, because that's really the study that we've been waiting on to address the much more comprehensive fix to the Holiday Isle beaches. We wanted to see if there's any tools in the toolbox that would help us extend the life of these beaches. These beaches were restored in 2013, and we got 4 or 5 years. And the major reason we only got 4 or 5 years is because of the Gap property, that we skipped that. We reduced it from an 8 to 10 year life cycle down to a 4 or 5 year life cycle. There's an economic cost for that. There's a sand cost of having the Gap there. So, and I think MRD has some ideas. There's going to be some heavy lifting by the board to address some of those issues, but you have to address it with what it, I mean, this sand that we place, if this works out, it's not going to be there very long. It is just not going to be there long. I mean, it will, if it makes it to season, we'll be very, very fortunate.
In the words of a very wise person, I read it in the newspaper, sand moves, right?
Moves a lot. So
Destin, our old salt up here. That area was first populated. Fishermen showed up late 1800s. Is that?
I got there a decade after.
I wasn't expecting you to speak from personal experience. I feel like that came out wrong, and I
It's been there a
apologize.
while. It's been there a while.
Okay.
It's different life.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize again. You know, I was in a restaurant in Destin the other day, and there's this historic picture from I think it would be the 50s or 60s when Holiday Isle was first being constructed, and you can see all of the canals have been built, and it's nothing but this just big chunk of white sand. I got to thinking about that. You know, so these hardy, intelligent people came here much before us, and they looked at this place and they said, God, this is beautiful, we want to be here. And then they went and they built their houses and their docks on the bluff, right? They went behind the spit of sand, and they got protected, and that's where they built their city, and it stayed there for a long time, and that worked pretty well. And then at some point, somebody else came along and said, look at all the money we could make if we steal that big chunk of white sand from the federal government and carve it up into private pieces and sell it off. And I know we all just live with that reality now, but I just couldn't let the opportunity pass because I've been thinking about this, and gosh, we get arrogant as a species sometimes to say, we're going to take this thing and we're going to build walls and buildings and what is clearly an exceptionally dynamic system, we're going to conquer and control it, and it's not going to move again. And that's arrogant. And so now we all live with the result of that, which is that we're trying to control an exceptionally powerful and dynamic system that's out there, and we're going to continue to struggle with that dynamic, and it's going to be a very expensive dynamic to undertake. And I recognize that doesn't help us at all, but I just think that it was worth noting that, you know, at the end of the day, that's why we're here, because we took something that never should have been built on, and we built on it. And so now we all get to live with the after effects of that, including the folks that bought out there. They didn't do it either. They came to get their piece of paradise, but they weren't the original genesis of this issue. Can we, at this point at least, it sounds like, agree that Reach 2 will not be renourished during this immediate project? And if so, would a motion from this board taking that off the table be helpful so that we at least have clarity? That's number one question, Mr. Casella. And then number two, I guess I still, out of all of that, maybe there were too many numbers moving around, but I never got to the point that I understood clearly that we had agreement from the east side and the west side of the pass that there weren't going to be any more lawsuits or injunctions filed, and we had a clear division as to which sand was going where.
Yeah, and I think at your last meeting, you did give the deadline of February 1st for securing easements. Those easements have not been secured. So I think that is right for a motion to basically take Reach 2 off the table. That then clears the pathway for us to the final resolution of the sand placement east and west. And it would, at that point, Reach 2's off the table. That gives you a 50-50 split of whatever available sand's out there. If it's 160,000 cubic yards or 210. So that, and I think that would be acceptable to DEP. I believe it would be acceptable to Mr. Donovan and the Sherrys. And it's not all the sand that Reach 1 needs, but it's a start. And then the only wrinkle in the whole issue is that we have to commit within 3 years that we will replace that sand that we're not currently placing in Reach 1. And that could be as little as 80,000, or as if we did 105, then it could be as little as 55,000 cubic yards.
And that decision then over that 3-year period can come in the context of the study that is being completed by Mr. Dombrowski, and hopefully more informed decisions come through that effort.
It's designed to give us that full 3 years, although I don't candidly, personally think that Holiday Isle can last 3 years without additional sand beyond this.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we direct staff to disregard further efforts to renourish Reach 2 in this immediate renourishment project, and that we direct staff to work towards a project that will roughly equally apportion sand between Reach 1 and Reach 3, acknowledging the fact that we will be required to do an additional renourishment nourishment within the next 3 years, as to reach 1 and potentially reach 2.
I'll second that.
All right. Commissioner Boyles has a motion, and Commissioner Ketchel has the second to take Reach 2 off the table. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Number 2, Mr. Casella.
This is a request on item number B2 is to have the board authorize us to secure a project management to help with the recently approved projects that you did on the surtax. Currently, Public Works manages with its in-house capabilities about $7.5 to $8 million a year in projects. And those folks are pretty well have their plates full. This would be a project manager that help us exclusively dedicated to the surtax projects. And it would be additional resources that we have to move those 7 projects in addition to the public safety training facility as expeditiously as we can from start to finish. So we are asking for that. As Mr. Peacock said, we will be bringing back some budget amendments and stuff. And we'll put this resource in that ask. One of the concerns that Mr. Stewart had is that this position, any positions that's dedicated to this have to spend 100% of their time on surtax. They won't be split and spent any other time on any other operational issues and those types of things. These are just a resource exclusively for the capital projects, and it's as real as they cost as of the design fees and services during construction. So we'd ask for your consideration of this request.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
If I might, and we'll see if I can get a second for discussion, but I would move that we TP this item B, or item 2, until at least the next 2-week meeting in the south end of the county. I don't think any of us disagree that we're gonna need some help here, but the methodology of where and how that comes and where the money comes from, I don't know that personally I beat this around enough to stand. So I make a motion, we continue this till the next meeting.
If anybody will second it.
Can you talk a little bit about your objections?
Well, my object,
Basically what your concern, I would like to understand
Well-
your concerns.
If we do that, I guess we'll need to make another motion.
I'll second for discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I can help with this a little bit. So we know, our team noticed this when it hit the agenda. And so we've got some concerns on how where we're gonna place the position, how it's gonna be lined up in departments. We've got questions that we don't have answers for yet in relation to how we're gonna build the accounting structure for the half cent sales tax. We've had questions from citizens to our office related to how it fits in, some questioning of that. I certainly feel like that the position or a project manager helping with these projects is an allowable expense for the asset sales tax. However, how we do it and where it fits in and how we account for it, whether it be in the actual department or whether it be in the public works department, and then costs allocated to the different project buckets, I think those are concerns that we have at this point that I don't think we've got answers for yet. So I certainly would support putting it off to the next one.
And we don't have a problem with bringing that back at the next meeting, and we can work through with the clerk's office and figure out exactly how we want to allocate it to the respective departments.
Commissioner?
Yeah, and I won't object to taking 2 weeks to kind of sort out those details, but what I do want to do is echo support for the notion that you're going to have somebody to manage projects. Ask anyone, say, here's $1 million a month to spend for the next 10 years, but you're not allowed to have any help doing it. And then let us know how well that goes for you. It's just not going to go well. You just can't. We're not going to be able to adequately spend these dollars without having the people manage the process of spending those dollars. So I don't think the public expected us to build, $1 million a month worth of infrastructure and not have anybody oversee it to make sure that it's done properly and that the funds spent properly, etc. And so I'm in full support of having a position the when, the where, and the how, I'm less concerned about their smarter minds than mine. They'll figure that out, and so I'm good with taking 2 weeks, but I just want this thing back in front of us to make a decision so that we can begin the hiring process, so we can get a rock star to help us properly spend these dollars, so we can get some infrastructure on the ground for our public without any undue delay, because as of today, as of this moment, as of the second, we are collecting sales tax on every transaction occurring out there right now. Those registers are ringing, and we want to be prepared to be able to spend it for our citizens and not waste time having it sit in a bank. I think one thing we could do that would help everyone on this is intend or provide a clause that this position would sunset at some point after the sales tax sunsets. And I think you would need 12 to 24 months to allow for the tail period to spend those dollars. But I would assume, Mr. Stewart, correct me if I'm wrong, we could put a caveat that says in this position goes away in 12 years, absent further action of whoever's sitting in these chairs at that time to continue that position. That lets us give that comfort that we're not just growing government for the sake of growing government.
That's correct. You can't put that proviso in the position.
All right. Motion on the floor to table this item for 2 weeks to entertain it at the next South End meeting.
Chairman,
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think she's.
I just have one more comment. I don't disagree with this position. In fact, I wholeheartedly agree, and especially with the comments of Chairman Boyles. One of my concerns is that we have 5 commissioners, 5 districts with needs. So I want to make sure that the accounting is in place so that each commissioner feels that they're getting their fair share of the pie.
And again, that's overall project management, and that's, again, part of what you've challenged your surtax committee to do. I wish it was as easy as $1 million a month, but it's gonna start out slow and they're gonna ramp up. And there's gonna be months as you get into this second, third, and fourth year where you're gonna be spending $3 or $4 or $5 million a month, and you gotta have resources. And I don't wanna mislead him, this is one position. I think as we ramp up and we start getting into the peak of this, we may need some additional administrative staff to move this so that you can meet the needs of your constituents. And that's, but this project manager is the first kind of log on the fire effort. But we'll bring those back and make sure that we work with the clerk's office on the accounting, and the position costs get spread to the respective projects, and that's where it needs to go. So.
And Mr. Chairman, just to wrap up before we vote, my issues, I agree with everything that's been said, and I'm going to support finding some help to do this. But I've been told by several people that there's been things represented, and I want to get with Ted, I want to get with some other people, and I want to make sure we do exactly what we promised. And I know we all want to do that, so that it's in regards to that.
Anything further, commissioners? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll take a 10-minute recess.
We'll get you the 2 we have